Imagine a world where your soul is forged in folded steel and your only currency is a dignity more precious than life itself. In the biting cold of 1877, atop the jagged ridges of Shiroyama, 500 men stood against 30,000. They did not pray for victory. They prayed for a death worthy of their ancestors. Did you know that the last charge of the samurai wasn't a tactical maneuver, but a deliberate act of ritual suicide performed in motion? This was the end of an era, written in blood. Could you stand your ground when history itself demands your extinction? Chapter 1. The Death of a Dream. The air in Japan was changing, thick with the acrid smoke of coal and the industrial hum of a world moving too fast. For 1,000 years, the samurai were the spine of the nation, the elite, the poets, the executioners. But by the late 19th century, they had become ghosts in their own land. Saigo Takamori, the true samurai, could no longer watch his brothers wither in the shadows of Western progress. He chose to ignite a fire that would consume him. He chose to fight. Saigo was a giant of a man, possessing a presence that commanded silence. He didn't want a revolution for power. He wanted a revolution for the spirit. As he led his rebel army toward the heart of the new empire, he knew the odds were impossible. The imperial army was no longer a collection of warriors, but a machine, peasant conscripts armed with American rifles and German artillery. The clash was inevitable. It was the collision of ancient steel against modern lead, of individual mastery against mass-produced slaughter. Could a blade still cut the wind of change? The answer lay in the dirt. The Satsuma Rebellion roared across the southern provinces like a dying sun's final flare. For months, Saigo's men fought with a ferocity that terrified the conscript soldiers. They moved like shadows, striking with the precision of a surgeon and the rage of a storm. But bravery is a poor shield against a Gatling gun. By the time they reached the heights of Shiroyama, the rebellion was broken. Only the core remained, the fanatics, the loyalists, the men who preferred a grave to a world without honor. They were trapped, surrounded, and ready to become legends in the eyes of the gods. History often forgets the losers, but it never forgets the defiant. Saigo looked out over the landscape of his childhood, realizing that the Japan he loved was already dead. The samurai were no longer needed in a world of steam engines and international trade. They were a relic, a beautiful but sharp inconvenience to the emperor's vision of a modern state. This realization didn't bring despair. It brought a cold, terrifying clarity. If they were to be the last of their kind, they would ensure the final page of their history was written in the deepest shade of crimson imaginable. Chapter 2. The Siege of Shiroyama. The night of September 23rd was unnervingly quiet. From the peak of the mountain, the samurai could see the campfires of the imperial army encircling them like a tightening noose. 30,000 barrels were leveled at their position. General Yamagata, the man leading the government forces, was a friend of Saigo. He sent a letter pleading for surrender to avoid the inevitable carnage. Saigo didn't even reply. How do you explain to a man who has traded his soul for gunpowder that some things are worth more than survival? To surrender was to admit the samurai were obsolete. The samurai spent their final hours in a way that would haunt the memories of their enemies. They didn't huddle in fear. They drank their last rations of sake. They composed death poems, jisei, to capture the fleeting beauty of the moment, and they sharpened their blades one last time. There is a terrifying beauty in a man who has accepted his end. There is no more fear, no more doubt, only the clarity of the edge. They dressed in their finest traditional robes, rejecting the modern uniforms of the state. They were going to die as they lived, as masters. As the first gray light of September 24th began to bleed over the horizon, the silence was shattered. The Imperial artillery opened fire, a relentless barrage that tore the very mountain apart. 7,000 shells screamed through the air in a single hour. The earth groaned under the weight of the metal. In their caves and trenches, the samurai waited. They didn't return fire. They had almost no ammunition left. They simply waited for the smoke to clear, for the moment when they could look their executioners in the eye. The era of the sword was coming to a close. Imagine the sound, not just the explosions, but the ringing in the ears, the smell of sulfur mixing with the damp morning dew. The Imperial commanders were nervous. They had the numbers, they had the technology, but they feared the men on that hill. They knew that a cornered samurai is the most dangerous creature on earth. Every soldier in the valley below wondered if their rifle would be fast enough to stop a man who no longer feared the bullet. The tension was a physical weight, pressing down on the mountain until the very air seemed ready to ignite. Chapter 3. The Final Charge. When the bombardment stopped, a heavy, choking mist hung over the slopes. Then, through the haze, the Imperial soldiers heard it, a low, rhythmic drumming of feet. And then the scream, a war cry that had echoed through the Sengoku period, reborn for one final, bloody crescendo. Saigo Takamori drew his katana and stepped forward. Behind him, the remaining 500 charged. They didn't run like desperate men. They moved with the grace of a falling petal, a coordinated strike aimed at the heart of the modern world. They were lightning in human form. The carnage was absolute. The Imperial lines opened fire, a wall of lead that mowed down the front ranks like wheat. But the samurai didn't stop. Those who survived the initial volleys crashed into the government lines. For a few brief, horrific minutes, it was 1573 again. The katana proved its lethality, severing limbs and shattering bayonets. The conscripts, terrified by these demons in silk, began to break. But there were too many of them. For every samurai that fell, 10 more soldiers stepped forward. The mountain began to turn red with the blood of the past. Saigo was struck. A bullet tore through his thigh, then another in his stomach. He fell to his knees, the blood soaking into the sacred soil of his home. His loyal lieutenant, Beppu Shinsuke, rushed to his side. Saigo looked at the chaos around him, at his dying brothers, and whispered his final command. He wouldn't allow the state to take his head as a trophy of progress. He performed seppuku right there on the battlefield, the ultimate act of defiance. Beppu acted as his second, swinging his blade to end the life of the great samurai. The moment Saigo's head left his shoulders, the spirit of the rebellion shifted. It was no longer a battle, it was a massacre. The remaining 40 or 50 samurai, seeing their leader gone, did not flee. They did not drop their swords. Instead, they gathered in a tight circle, a thorn in the side of the massive imperial machine. They fought until their blades broke, and when their blades broke, they fought with their hands. They were seeking the warrior's death, a concept so foreign to the modern mind that the imperial soldiers could only watch in stunned, horrific silence. Chapter 4. The Ghost of the Warrior. With Saigo dead, the remaining samurai didn't flee. They didn't beg for mercy. They saw their leader fall and found a new gear of desperation. They charged until the very last man was bayoneted or shot. By 6 a.m., the sun was fully up and the hills were silent. The rebellion was over. The emperor's peace had been bought with the extinction of his most loyal caste. When General Yamagata walked among the bodies, he found Saigo's head. He washed it personally, a final gesture of respect for a man he had been forced to destroy in the name of progress. The tragedy of Shiroyama wasn't just the loss of life, it was the loss of an identity. With the samurai gone, Japan became a powerhouse of industry and empire, but it lost its ancient heartbeat. Yet something strange happened. The government that killed Saigo realized they had created a martyr. They couldn't erase him, so they deified him. Within years, Saigo was pardoned posthumously, and statues were raised to his honor. They used the image of the man they murdered to instill a new kind of discipline in their modern soldiers. The warrior spirit was stolen and repackaged. How do we reconcile the man with the myth? Saigo was a traditionalist who fought against the very government he helped create. He was a man of contradictions, much like the Japan of 1877. He represented the struggle between who we were and who we are becoming. The samurai at Shiroyama knew they couldn't win the battle, but they won the war for history. They ensured that the transition to modernity would always be haunted by the memory of the sword. They turned a military defeat into a cultural immortality that persists in every film, book, and soul today. The graves at Shiroyama are not marked with bitterness, but with a quiet, heavy respect. Even the descendants of the men who fired the guns visit this site to bow. They recognize that something essential was buried here. It is the graveyard of a philosophy that placed duty above the self. In our modern age of convenience and compromise, the absolute conviction of the 500 feels alien yet magnetic. We are drawn to their story because it reminds us that there was once a time when a man's word was his life and his honor was his eternity.
Chapter 5. The Sword's Final Echo. What remains of the samurai today? We see them in the corporate boardrooms of Tokyo, in the discipline of the martial arts dojos, and in the unwavering stoicism of the Japanese spirit. But the raw, bleeding edge of the warrior vanished on that hillside. The Meiji government succeeded in building their empire, but they did so by amputating their own history. The new Japan was efficient, powerful, and wealthy, yet it lacked the poetic tragedy of the Age of Heroes. The samurai didn't just die, they were sacrificed on the altar of a future they didn't want. Consider the weight of that sacrifice. To know the world has passed you by, yet to refuse to change. Is that madness, or is it the ultimate form of integrity? The imperial soldiers who stood over the broken bodies of the Satsuma rebels weren't cheering. Most were weeping. They were looking at their uncles, their brothers, and their icons. They had won the hill, but they felt like they had lost their way. This is the dark irony of Shiroyama. The victors were the ones who felt the greatest sense of loss. The modern world was born in that moment of grief. The Gatling gun changed the nature of courage. Before, war was about the individual, the strength of your arm, the sharpness of your eye. After Shiroyama, war became a matter of logistics and industrial output. The hero was replaced by the unit. The individual was swallowed by the state. This is why the last stand of the samurai resonates so deeply. It represents the final protest of the human spirit against the relentless, grinding gears of the machine. It was the last time a man could stand on a mountain and challenge the future with a piece of steel. Saigo Takamori's death poem spoke of the falling snow and the fleeting nature of life. He understood that he was a blossom being swept away by a winter storm. But blossoms leave a scent. The scent of Shiroyama is the lingering fragrance of Bushido, the way of the warrior.
It tells us that while empires rise and fall, and while technology renders our tools obsolete, the character of the man using those tools is the only thing that truly survives the test of time. The samurai are gone, but their ghost still watches over us, silent and sharp.
Chapter 6: Legacy in the Modern Age. If you walk the streets of Kagoshima today, you will see the great Saigo everywhere. He is a mascot, a hero, a god. The very state that hunted him down now uses him as the symbol of Japanese virtue. It is a strange fate for a rebel, but perhaps it is the only way a modern nation can cope with the guilt of its birth. By embracing the samurai they killed, they attempt to reclaim the honor they discarded. It is a hollow victory, perhaps, but it keeps the memory of the 500 alive in a world that would otherwise forget. We must ask ourselves, what would Saigo think of our world? A world of instant gratification, of digital shadows, and of endless compromise. Would he see honor in our struggles, or would he find us as obsolete as the imperial government found him? The suicide mission at Shiroyama wasn't just about the 19th century. It was a message sent forward in time. It was a warning that a life without a cause is merely a slow death. They chose the fast death, the violent death, because it allowed them to remain themselves until the very end. There is a specific kind of silence found in the forests of Kyushu. It is a heavy silence, filled with the ghosts of the men who refused to surrender. When you stand where they stood, you can almost hear the clash of the blades and the roar of the cannons. You can feel the heat of the fire and the coldness of the resolve. It is a place where history isn't something you read, but something you feel in your marrow. The 500 didn't die for a piece of land. They died for an idea. And ideas, unlike men, are bulletproof. As we look back at the bloody slopes of 1877, we shouldn't pity the samurai. Pity is for those who die without meaning. The men of Shiroyama achieved exactly what they set out to do. They ended their era on their own terms. They turned their extinction into an art form. They showed the world that even when you are destined to lose, you can still choose how you face the end. That choice is the ultimate freedom. That choice is the essence of the samurai. They were the last of the giants, walking into the fire to save their souls. The sun finally set on the samurai, but the twilight lasted for over a century. Every time we value character over convenience or loyalty over profit, we are channeling a small part of that spirit. The last stand wasn't a tragedy of failure, but a triumph of the human will. They were 500 men against 30,000, but in the eyes of history, the 500 are the only ones we truly remember. The names of the generals and the politicians have faded into the dust, but the name Saigo Takamori remains etched in stone and spirit.
Conclusion: the echo of the blade. The swords of Shiroyama are silent now, rusted away or locked behind glass, but their echo still rings through history. It asks us a haunting question: what is your Shiroyama? What is the one thing you would stand for when the entire world tells you to sit down? Honor isn't about winning. It's about being true to the steel in your soul when the smoke rises. If this story of the ultimate sacrifice stirred your spirit, honor our work by hitting that subscribe button, ringing the bell, and commenting Bushido below. I'm the narrator for Echoes of Ages. Remember, history is watching. Stand tall. As the mist clears from the mountain, we are left with a single sharp truth. The samurai did not die in vain. They died to remind us that life is not measured by its length, but by its depth. They were the final guardians of a flame that began a millennium ago. Now that flame lives in you.
Will you carry it, or will you let the modern world blow it out? The choice is yours. Thank you for walking this path of blood and honor with us today. Until the next battle, stay grounded, stay sharp, and never forget the echoes of the ages.